Washington, D.C. The oldest of 4 siblings, Relisha wasn't just a big sister, she was the little mother held up, and stability slipped further and further away. By the time Relisha was in the 2nd grade, the family no longer had a place to call their own. And so they were placed in one of the most infamous places in Washington, D.C. The D.C. General Family Shelter. To outsiders, it was a shelter. But to those who lived there, it was something far different. D.C. General had once been a hospital. It closed in 2001 after years of neglect and disrepair. But the city saw an opportunity and repurposed the crumbling building into a shelter for homeless families. On paper, it was supposed to be a refuge. A stepping stone. A place where families could find stability until they were back on their feet. In reality, it was a warehouse of human misery. Over 600 children lived there at any given time, packed into rooms meant for half as many people. Families slept 5, 6, sometimes even 7 to a room. The walls were cracked and peeling. Cockroaches crawled across kitchen counters. showed up. She smiled. She tried. Because even with everything stacked against her, she wanted to be like the other kids. She wanted to learn. She wanted to belong. In a world that had given her so little, Relisha held on to the most fragile thing she had left, her childhood. But childhood was fragile inside DC General. It wasn't just poverty that haunted the walls. It was danger. The shelter was a chaotic maze filled with hundreds of adults and children, some just like Shamika, families desperate for a chance to climb out of poverty. But there were others, too. People with criminal records. Histories of violence. Histories of addiction. Oversight was weak. Supervision was minimal. The line between safety and risk blurred every single day. The very place that was supposed to offer protection had instead become a breeding ground for fear. And in that environment, it was easy for predators to blend in. Easy for them to hide behind friendly smiles. Easy for them to find children who were vulnerable, children who longed for kindness, children who didn't always know when something was wrong. And for Relisha, one such predator was already waiting. His name was Kahlil Tatum. To most, he was just a janitor. A worker at the shelter. Someone who walked the halls every day with keys on his belt and a smile on his face. But to the children inside, he was something different. He was the man who handed out gifts. Who offered money. Who gave them attention when so many others ignored them. He made children feel special. But behind the kindness, behind the charm, lurked something far darker. And for Relisha Rudd, crossing paths with him would change everything. She was only 8 years old. A little girl with big dreams and a bright smile. A sister. A daughter. A child who deserved safety, joy, and love. But in the decaying walls of DC General, safety was only an illusion. And soon, Relisha's fragile innocence would collide with a man who saw her not as a child, but as an opportunity. And a system too broken, too careless, too overwhelmed, would fail to stop it. DC General was supposed to be a shelter. A safe haven. A place where families in crisis could rebuild. But in truth, it was a place where hope went to die. The walls told the story before the people ever did, cracked plaster, mold creeping down corners, paint chipping in long strips. Families squeezed into tiny rooms, children sleeping on mattresses that sagged to the floor. In the winter, the heat barely worked. In the summer, the air conditioning failed, leaving hallways stifling and suffocating. Over 600 children lived here at any given time. 600. Each of them carrying dreams as fragile as glass. And yet, inside those walls, childhood was constantly under attack. Inspectors and reporters would later call DC General a human warehouse. But for Relisha Rudd, this was home. Her mother, Shamika Young, tried to do what she could, but she was overwhelmed. She had 4 children to care for and little support to lean on. Poverty had boxed her into a corner, and the shelter, for all its flaws, was the only option. Relisha tried to make the best of it. Teachers said she sometimes came to school in dirty clothes, sometimes tired from sleepless nights at the shelter. But she still raised her hand in class. She still smiled at her friends. She still wanted to be a doctor when she grew up. She was holding on to her childhood with both hands. But inside DC General, there were dangers that even the brightest smile couldn't chase away. The shelter wasn't just filled with struggling families. It was a revolving door of strange who cared. To the parents, he looked generous. Someone willing to help when others wouldn't. But predators often wear masks. And behind Tatum's kindness was a darkness no one at the time could see. For Relisha, that mask would prove deadly. He began to take an interest in her. More than in other children. He gave her gifts. He called her his little friend. He made her feel special in a way she wasn't always made to feel at home or at school. And for a child desperate for safety, for stability, for love, his attention must have felt like a lifeline. But it wasn't a lifeline. It was a trap. The system should have seen it. The staff should have noticed. The caseworkers should have intervened. But at DC General, children were invisible. They were numbers on a list, not lives at risk. Every red flag was ignored. Every warning sign dismissed. And slowly, quietly, a predator was circling closer and closer to an 8-year-old girl. This was the world Relisha Rudd lived in during her final months. A broken system. A crumbling shelter. A mother fighting to survive. And a janitor who was hiding something dark in plain sight. Kahlil Tatum. To most people inside the DC General family shelter, he was just a janitor. A worker. A man who swept floors, unlocked doors, and carried his jangling keys down long hallways. Someone who blended into the background, barely noticed in the chaos of survival. But to the children, he was something different. He was the man who smiled at them when others walked by. The man who slipped them candy. The man who gave them gifts when no one else did. He made himself a friend. But behind every gift, every smile, every kind word, was a dangerous man hiding in plain sight. Tatum was born and raised in Washington, D.C. His life was complicated, marked by brushes with the law, connections to crime, and a violent past that rarely showed on the surface. People who knew him described him as charming at times, but others recalled flashes of temper, of control, of something unsettling behind the eyes. Yet somehow, he had managed to land a job in one of the most vulnerable environments in the city, a homeless shelter filled with children. How did he get there? That's one of the haunting questions at the heart of Relisha's story. Background checks were weak. Oversight was weaker. The system was crumbling, and the cracks were wide enough for someone like Tatum to slip through unnoticed. Once inside, he began to shape his role. He wasn't just a janitor. He positioned himself as a provider, someone who could offer small luxuries to children and families who had nothing. He would hand out little toys, a few dollars, sometimes even larger gifts. He bought attention. He bought trust. And for children like Relisha, who were growing up surrounded by instability, uncertainty, and hardship, his attention felt like something rare. Teachers would later say they noticed Relisha showing up to school with new things she shouldn't have had. New clothes. A tablet. Little gifts that didn't match her family's financial situation. When asked, Relisha would say they were from her goddaddy. That goddaddy was Kahlil Tatum. Some saw it as generosity. Others raised quiet concerns. But inside DC General, where chaos was constant and staff were overwhelmed, no one stopped to ask the harder questions. Why was a janitor giving so much to one little girl? Why was he spending so much time with her? Why was no one stepping in? Predators thrive where systems are weak. And DC General was weak everywhere it mattered. Relisha's family knew Tatum. Some relatives accepted his generosity. For Shamika Young, struggling to raise 4 children, the help may have seemed like a blessing. But blessings can come with a price. In hindsight, every piece of the puzzle looks obvious. The attention. The gifts. The secrecy. The way Relisha lit up when she talked about him. It wasn't kindness. It was grooming. He was weaving a trap around an 8-year-old girl, and no one stopped him. Behind the smile, behind the keys, behind the mask of a helpful worker, was a man who had already proven dangerous. Tatum had a criminal history, including charges related to drugs and weapons. He had a reputation for violence. He was not the kind of man who should have been anywhere near vulnerable children. And yet, at DC General, he wasn't just near them. He was trusted with them. As weeks turned into months, his presence in Relisha's life grew larger. The shelter gave him access. Her family gave him permission. And the system gave wanted to be a doctor one day. So when she stopped showing up, alarm bells went off. School officials began to ask questions. Where was Relisha? Why hadn't her mother informed anyone? Why hadn't she brought in a doctor's note? And that's when the first lie surfaced. Relisha's mother told school officials that her daughter was under the care of a doctor. A man named Dr. Tatum. But there was no Dr. Tatum. The man she was referring to was Kahlil Tatum, the janitor from the shelter. The predator who had been circling Relisha for months. By the time the school realized something was wrong, it was already far too late. On March 13th, the school requested a meeting with Shamika Young about Relisha's absences. Shamika didn't show. A social worker was contacted. They went to investigate. When the social worker visited the shelter to check on Relisha, she was told the little girl was under medical care. Again, the name Tatum was given. On March 20th, his wife, Andrea, was found dead in a hotel room, shot execution style. Investigators immediately believed Kahlil Tatum had pulled the trigger. The story was spiraling into something far darker than anyone had feared. Relisha wasn't just missing. She was in the hands of a violent man who had already killed once. And no one knew where they were. The search intensified. Helicopters circled. Police flooded the streets. Missing posters went up across DC. Vigils were held. Strangers lit candles. The city began to whisper her name. But even as the community rallied, the system that had failed her was scrambling to catch up. Relisha had been missing for over 2 weeks before the investigation had even truly begun. And by then, the trail was ice cold. For the people of Washington, D.C., it was unthinkable, an 8-year-old girl, missing in plain sight, her fate bound to a man who should have never been allowed near her. For the police, it became a race against time. A race to find her before Tatum vanished forever. But in the shadows of the Capitol, the clock was ticking. And every passing second made it less likely that Relisha Rudd would ever be found alive. By the time Relisha Rudd was officially declared missing, the situation had already spiraled beyond control. Police quickly pieced together the fragments. Relisha was last seen with Kahlil Tatum. He was no doctor. He was no family friend. He was a janitor with a violent past, and now, he was the only lead they had. On March 20th, just one day after the missing person report was filed, the search for Relisha took a darker turn. That morning, police discovered the body of Tatum's wife, Andrea, inside a hotel room at the Red Roof Inn in Oxon Hill, Maryland. She had been shot in the head, execution style. Detectives didn't need long to connect the dots. Andrea had been alive only hours before. Witnesses had seen her checking into the room with her husband. When her body was found, Kahlil was nowhere to be seen. The conclusion was chillingly clear: not only was Tatum on the run, but he had already killed. And if he was willing to murder his own wife, what hope did an 8-year-old little girl have? The manhunt exploded. Police issued an Amber Alert. Helicopters circled overhead. Search dogs scoured wooded areas and highways. Investigators poured through hotel records, bank accounts, surveillance footage, anything that might offer a clue. But Tatum was slippery. For years, he had lived in the shadows, moving between jobs, neighborhoods, and shady dealings. He knew how to disappear. And now, with Relisha in his hands, he was one step ahead of law enforcement. Every hour that passed tightened the knot in the city's stomach. The media swarmed the story. News anchors repeated her name over and over: Relisha Rudd. Community activists organized search parties. Flyers went up on telephone poles, in corner stores, on church doors. Have you seen this child? Her face, a smiling school portrait, hair neatly done, eyes full of life, stared. Years have passed since she vanished, and still, the truth remains buried. No one has ever been charged in connection with her disappearance. No body has ever been found. And no one, not police, not family, not neighbors, can say for certain what happened to her after those last haunting images of her walking through a hotel hallway with Kahlil Tatum. What we are left with are questions. Did Tatum kill Relisha before turning the gun on himself? Did he hide her body somewhere in the city's underbelly, in an abandoned building, a park, or the waters of the Anacostia? Or, is it possible she was passed to someone else, her fate sealed in secrecy that may never be uncovered? Detectives have their theories. Some believe she was murdered quickly, her body concealed before Tatum's own death. Others suggest she may have been trafficked, that her disappearance was part of something even larger and more sinister. But without evidence, all of it remains speculation. And so, the questions linger. For her family, the unanswered silence is its own torment. They live in the space between hope and grief, unable to mourn, unable to move on, unable to let go. For them, Relisha is not a symbol, not a headline, not a case file. She is a daughter, a granddaughter, a sister. A little girl who loved school, who wanted to be a doctor, who deserved a life she never got to live. For the city of Washington, her case is a scar that will never heal. Relisha became the face of every child lost in poverty, every child failed by broken systems, every child whose life was written off before it even began. Her name has been invoked in rallies against homelessness, in calls for reform in child welfare, in speeches demanding change. Her story is taught as a warning, a reminder of what happens when indifference and neglect go unchallenged. And yet, beneath the politics, beneath the outrage, there is still that one photograph. Relisha's bright smile. Her curious eyes. A school portrait frozen in time. That is who she was. That is who she will always be. Her legacy is not just the questions she left behind, but the demand that we ask better ones. How many other Relishas are there? How many children slip through the cracks unseen? And how do we make sure that no more are forgotten? Her name must not fade. Because in the end, Relisha Rudd is not only the little girl who disappeared. She is the little girl Washington, D.C. forgot. And remembering her, saying her name, telling her story, refusing to let the silence win, is the only way she lives on. Relisha Rudd's name should never have been forgotten. She was not a statistic, not a case file, not a headline. She was a little girl, full of life, full of dreams, full of possibility. And yet, the city that should have protected her lost her. The truth of what happened in those final days may never be known. Maybe it's buried in the silence of the man who took her. Maybe it lingers in the cracks of the system that failed her. But one thing is certain, Relisha's story is not over. Because as long as her name is spoken, as long as her face is remembered, as long as people demand justice, she lives on. So tonight, as you turn away from this story, I ask you to carry her name with you. Say it. Remember it. Refuse to let the silence win. Relisha Rudd. 8 years old. Missing since March 2014. The little girl DC forgot. And the little girl we must never forget. Surveillance footage placed Tatum at several motels in the DC and Maryland area during early March. One clip showed him walking down a hallway, Relisha trailing behind. But after that, she seemed to vanish into thin air. Detectives followed his trail into Prince George's County. They found his abandoned car, empty. They found the hotel room where his wife had been murdered. But no Relisha. Searches expanded into parks, rivers, abandoned buildings. Hundreds of volunteers joined officers in the hunt. At night, candlelight vigils lit up neighborhoods, each flame a prayer that she was still alive. But with each passing day, hope began to flicker. Then came March 31st. Inside a wooded area of Kenilworth Park and Aquatic Gardens, northeast Washington, police discovered a body. It was Kahlil Tatum. He had shot himself with a handgun. The prime suspect, the only person who might have known where Relisha was dead. And the little girl? She was nowhere to be found. The manhunt had ended, but the mystery had only deepened. For the community, it was devastating. Parents clutched their children tighter. Neighbors demanded answers. How could an 8-year-old disappear under the care of city shelters, schools, and social services? For the police, it was a case that refused to close. Every officer knew the odds were grim. With Tatum dead, the trail had gone cold. But still, they searched. Still, they dug through every lead. For Relisha's family, the days became unbearable. A mother left to wonder whether her child was alive or gone. Siblings left to grow up with the shadow of her absence. And for the city of Washington, D.C., it was a wound that has never healed. The hunt for Relisha Rudd began with hope. It ended in silence, with the body of a killer in the woods, and the unanswered question that still haunts a nation. What happened to Relisha Rudd? The manhunt ended in the woods of Kenilworth Park with a single gunshot. The body of Kahlil Tatum lying on the ground. But Relisha Rudd was still missing. Her story did not end with a rescue. It did not end with justice. It ended with questions. Questions that remain unanswered to this day. For the city of Washington, D.C., her disappearance was more than a tragedy. It was an indictment. How does an 8-year-old girl vanish while living inside a government-run shelter? How does a janitor with a violent past gain unfettered access to vulnerable children? How do weeks of school absences pass without immediate intervention? How does a child disappear, and no one notice until it's far too late? The public demanded answers. News outlets covered every angle of the case. Community leaders called it a failure at every level: the shelter, the school system, child protective services, the police. Each agency had a piece of Relisha's life. Each one had missed the warning signs. The shelter had failed to protect her. The school had failed to escalate her absences sooner. Social services had failed to act decisively when concerns were raised. And the system as a whole had failed to see Relisha Rudd as more than just another number in the files. Protests and vigils swept across D.C. Activists marched through the streets carrying her photo. Candlelight services were held outside D.C. General. Neighbors cried, strangers prayed, children released balloons into the sky in her memory. But prayers could not bring her back. For her family, the pain was indescribable. Her mother, Shamika Young, faced relentless scrutiny. Some accused her of negligence. Others defended her, pointing to the crushing poverty and systemic neglect that left her with few options. Her grandmother, Melissa Young, became a more public voice, pleading for her granddaughter's safe return, then later for justice. She said over and over, Relisha was a child who deserved better. The city's leaders promised change. In the months that followed, officials announced reforms to child welfare oversight. Investigations were launched into how Tatum was ever allowed to work at the shelter. Calls to shut down D.C. General grew louder. And eventually, those calls were answered. By 2018, D.C. General was permanently closed. But for many, the closure felt too little, too late. For Relisha, it was no justice at all. Her case remains open, officially unresolved, her body never found. Police have said they believe she is likely dead. But without evidence, without answers, she is still listed among the missing. And that, perhaps, is the cruelest part. To this day, the people of D.C. drive past the abandoned grounds of the old hospital-turned-shelter and remember the little girl who vanished inside its walls. Her name lingers in community meetings, in advocacy groups, in whispered prayers at church. Relisha Rudd. She has become more than a missing child. She is a symbol of every failure, every broken promise, every vulnerable life that goes unnoticed until it's gone. And for those who loved her, and for a city that will never forget her, the question still burns. How could this happen? And who will make sure it never happens again? Relisha Rudd's story ends not with answers, but with silence.